Congratulations. This is a crazy event. Leading up to this, it was so insane for you to be out for so many years and then challenge the middleweight champion, moving up a weight class. What was this all like for you?
Man, I don't have a word in my mouth right now. It's my dream come true, guys. Thank you for the support. Everybody here that came to support me and Michael. It's a great sport. Thank you. We'll make a living because of you guys. Thank you so much.
There he was, guys. Maybe the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, George St-Pierre. And guys, what we're going to do this episode on the Fight Bananas podcast. What's up, guys? This is Dave Van Auken. I forgot that one. And there's so many podcasts we've been doing and so many interviews. I kind of wanted to throw out a hypothetical George St-Pierre 2020 return fight, right? I'm going to go like a top 5 opponents. Some of them are like kind of a dream fight. Some of them make perfect sense. Some of them, I think 1 or 2 is out of left field, but sometimes that's when the greats come back, is for that oddball challenge, for that left field opportunity to, cement your name, your legacy forever. Because the decade just ended. And almost consensusly, I just kept on hearing names, fighters of the decade. John Jones. DC. I even heard Khabib Nurmagomedov. Conor McGregor, and I heard he was more of an impact of the decade, and I kind of agree with that. But, you didn't hear George St-Pierre because he only had a couple fights. He had 3 or 4 welterweight fights at the very beginning, and then, of course, he had the Michael Bisping middleweight championship. So, of course, he wasn't fighter of the decade, maybe the decade before, but he's an all-timer. One of the greatest to ever step in the UFC octagon. So, if George St-Pierre, GSP, 2-weight class champion, 26-2, if he came back in 2020, who would he fight? All right, you ready? Here we go. I'm going to go down, no particular order. It's a top 5. We're going to start. Yep, we're going to start with him, GSP, trying to capture 3 championships in 3 different weight classes. How about George St-Pierre coming back to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov? The lightweight champion. Some people think Khabib Nurmagomedov is the greatest ever. Some people think that he is, in those lightweight, welterweight, featherweights, all those, that weight class. Khabib, not GSP, is the best ever. And he's 28-0. He's about to fight Tony Ferguson to get that 29. And you keep on hearing that he would love to get 30. 30-0, might retire. So how incredible, any month. it would be maybe the biggest main event in the history of UFC if GSP fought Khabib Nurmagomedov, Khabib going for win number 30, GSP going for 3 championships in 3 different weight classes. I can argue it's winner is the greatest UFC fighter of all time, because that fighter, GSP or Khabib, would get a win over the other guy who's in that top 3, 4, 5, the Mount Rushmore of UFC. So first of all, I have GSP fighting the lightweight champion, Khabib Nurmagomedov. You like that? All right. Number 2 of the list of 5 George St-Pierre future or wishful or hopeful opponents for a fight if he returned in 2020. And this is the one that probably maybe makes the most sense. This is the easiest puzzle to make. The welterweight champion. GSP is the greatest welterweight to ever live. I don't think there's any question, any doubt, any debate in that. So, the welterweight champion of the UFC right now, Kamaru Usman. And Kamaru Usman is a complete monster. His fight against Colby Covington was arguably one of the great fights in the whole year, or especially in the welterweights. And the welterweights of 2019 was the best division to be in. There's just so much drama, and Usman and Colby and George Masvidal and Diaz, and there was just so much angst out of the Askren and it was incredible. The welterweights were awesome in 2019, so if they can continue it and give us a summer blockbuster movie, Kamaru Usman versus George St-Pierre for that welterweight champion, and the same thing. Whoever wins that fight goes down as the greatest welterweight ever. Like, if Kamaru can beat GSP, can he leapfrog him? And that's a great debate. That's enough to sell pay-per-views and to sell, subscriptions to the ESPN Plus app. All that. I think GSP versus Usman, and this is one thing I particularly love, and I love why the Joanna and Wei Lee matchup. I love that old school and new school. I love the kind of the generational gap, and I love the decade versus decades going back and forth with each other. It's like, what's better? Is it the 2010s and the 2012s and 2015, or Usman is that new school 2020 fighter fighting out of Miami, a ton of swag, a ton of love. I just think it's that clash of decades. It's the clash of the new school UFC fan, the mixed martial art fan, the ESPN fan, or it's that old school fans like me that watched George St-Pierre's first fight, watched GSP, versus Matt Hughes, watched him bend down in the cage and prayed and begged for Dana White to get the fight. How about him versus Frank Trigg and Sean Sherk? I remember these fights. So George St-Pierre versus Kamaru Usman would be my number 2, or just the second of a handful of potential opponents for the great GSP. All right, so that's 2. So we got Usman and Khabib. You can't go wrong with that, right? You guys are with me on that one? So, if we had the lightweight champion and we had the welterweight champion, this is kind of my left field one. How about the champion that GSP just held? The last title George St-Pierre, George Rush, had was the middleweight champion. And this is a fight that will just, to me, will ignite the MMA world on fire, will ignite the middleweight, the whole weight class. How about GSP versus the last style bender, Israel Adesanya? And it looks like Israel and Yoel Romero is going to get, they're going to get locked into a cage sooner enough. And if Israel can get by him, you can really start putting together that Israel is becoming one of the great middleweights of all time. He's 18-0. He's undefeated. If he beats you all, that'd be 19-0. That would be a nice even 20-0. He's trying to capture against GSP. And in a way, Israel's never beat, that wrestler type of guy, right? Has he, he's fought Anderson Silva, Kevin Gassi. Yeah, he's a wrestler, but they stood up. That was the fight of 2019. Him versus Bobby Knuckles, now Yoel. It's just, to me, the clashes of styles is just, it's just terrific. It's that perfect wrestler or grappler against a stand-up. It's just a perfect matchup for mixed martial art fans. And then GSP to come back. Because, guys, GSP was fighting in 2013, 12, 11. That's his run with Hendricks and Nick Diaz and Carlos Condit. That was that. It was 4 years later when he came back to fight Bisping. And Bisping as the middleweight, it's almost a 3-year gap, a 2.5-year gap until he comes back and fights Israel Adesanya. Like this, I just love... In almost every major sport, there's not a lot of debate. Maybe there's a debate between 1 and 2, but other than that, we all know that Michael Jordan is the best basketball player ever. We all know that, Tom Brady is the best quarterback ever, the best champion ever. Boxing, there's a little bit of debate back and forth, and it seems like UFC, there's a ton of debate. Is it Anderson Silva? Is it John Jones? Is it Khabib? Is it GSP? Amanda Nunes? There's so much debate. An old school guy like Fedor. So if GSP could come back and defeat Israel Stylebender, who is right now, it's hard to argue pound for pound in his prime, just what he's doing, that would just be an just amazing cap to his career, amazing legacy statement to defeat, probably the best thing going in Israel Adesanya. All right, 2 left. And this is where we get really, really fun with it. These are both dream matchups. These are both, kind of Super Bowl type of events. They would just become the biggest fight of the year. This would become the biggest pay-per-view of the year. Pay-per-view buy rates, ESPN ads, the commercials. These 2 fights would just be the biggest fights that I think maybe the UFC can make in all of 2020. First and foremost, the old school king versus the new school king. And to me, if you know this podcast and if you listen to it and subscribe on iHeartRadio or the YouTube or any podcast platform, you know how much we go bananas for Georgie Masvidal. George Masvidal, age 35, the fighter of 2019, one of the greatest welterweight fighters in the world. It's the age difference isn't that big, and I think that George St-Pierre would think that he can wrestle Masvidal. Get him down to the ground, grapple him, a lot of technique, and dictate the fight. I think GSP thinks that he can win this fight right now. And especially they would fight at welterweight. And then here's another one. Here's another one I didn't even think of. How about Masvidal puts the BMF on the line? Puts the title on the line, the BMF title. Because almost I think a negative or a criticism that we have of GSP is that, he's not that gritty, BMF. He a lot of talk, violent. We think of him as a champion, almost like a surgeon, a very follows his game plan, which is great. He's one of the greatest fighters of all time. But we don't think of him as the bad guy. We don't think of him as, brawler and savage and all these things. And that's what we think of when we think of Georgie Masvidal. So how about if he can defeat him and get, capture the BMF title and kind of walk away with it? And I almost think that would make sense for the UFC to kind of put that title to bed. Almost, hey, we brought it out. Madison Square Garden, UFC 244, The Rock, Diaz, Masvidal. Boom, if that fight happens, if GSP wins and maybe rides in the sunset on the cowboy with the title, on the horse, let's just put that title to bed. It was cool. It was awesome when it was around, but the title is now gone. So I think GSP versus Masvidal anywhere. They can fight in Canada. They could fight in Miami, New York, Las Vegas. It would be absolutely bananas. And before we go into our last one, guys, the handful of fights that GSP could come back in 2020, I want to give a big shout out to one of our sponsors, And Still Nutrition. And Still Nutrition gives me the supplements I need, I take on the daily to get me in my prime. And Still Nutrition has a great joints issue that's just out of this world. It just handles all my nooks and crannies. Make sure you check them out, guys, at nstillnutrition.com. That is nstillnutrition.com. All right, guys, so we did 4. We did GSP, handful of opponents that he could come back for in 2020. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya, and George Masvidal. So who's number 5? Who's the last one on the list? Who's the one that can capture the imagination of all the mixed martial art fans, all the UFC fans, can grab people into seats, into watching the pay-per-view that's now $65, by the way. Who is that guy? There's no question, right? Everyone knows who this is. It's Conor, the Notorious McGregor. There's just no doubt about it. This is the fight that we heard rumors about a couple years ago. Conor McGregor about to fight Cowboy Cerrone here at UFC 246. Wow, I'm getting ahead of myself. So if Conor can get by Cowboy, and it's this week, guys, UFC 246 this week, if he can get by the Cowboy, could he fight GSP? George St-Pierre, one of the greatest fighters of all time. And this is another one. Whoever wins this fight, the legacy, the Mount Rushmore, the Stone, can argue they're one of the greatest fighters of all time. If Conor McGregor can say, hey guys, I defeated Eddie Alvarez, Nate Diaz, Jose Aldo, the Diamond Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway, and George St-Pierre, are you kidding me? Everyone says that he has an easy ride, that they kind of, and Cowboy Cerrone too. That's 8 Hall of Famers. That's the greatest run of featherweights, lightweights, and welterweights in the world for the last decade. So Conor McGregor versus GSP would be the best poster in UFC history. I think the banter, the talk, I think Conor would really boil GSP's blood. I think this would just be one of those once-in-a-lifetime fights. it would be The Rock versus John Cena at WrestleMania. Once in a lifetime. And then if GSP can beat Conor, this is the just the icing on the cake to the greatest career maybe in mixed martial arts. Welterweight, the greatest fighter of all time. This would be that fight that says, I think GSP will come into that fight as the bigger man. I think GSP will come into that fight feeling confident he can dictate where it goes. Wrestling, grappling, the cardio. I think all that leans to GSP. And I think GSP knows if he defeats a name like Conor McGregor, the voice of Conor McGregor, the trash talk of Conor McGregor, the left hand of Conor McGregor, this generation would see, wow, George St-Pierre is the greatest mixed martial artist of all time. There it is, guys. GSP's 5 potential opponents in 2020. Who do you think? Do you like those 5? Is there someone I missed? Do you think that's the best list you've ever heard in your whole entire life? Like what I think? I don't know, guys. GSP, if he returns in 2020, we know it's going to be big. We know it's going to be monumental. Conor, Masvidal, Adesanya, Nurmagomedov, and Usman, all 5 just to me is potential fights of the year, fights to start off the decade, UFC, GSP. It's just match made in heaven. I hope we see one of these. I hope he does return in 2020. I really do. That was it, guys. George St-Pierre, the greatest mixed martial artist maybe ever, coming back to the UFC octagon. All right, guys, we're going to finish up the episodes. Guys, make sure you subscribe to the iHeartRadio app. iHeartRadio and Fight Bananas is a match made in heaven. It's like GSP and UFC, peanut butter and jelly and spaghetti and meatball. All right. Also, subscribe to the Fight Bananas YouTube channel. I'm David Van Auken. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can always slide into the DMs. We're almost there. We have like 6 or 7 questions. We're going to do one of those Q&A shows probably in the upcoming weeks. You can slide in on my personal at David Van Auken, spell it correctly. Or you can always slide into the Fight Bananas official Instagram page. We get a lot of those questions in there. We just want to thank our sponsors that's been with us this episode. You listen to it. It's free, right? You listen to it on YouTube, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We didn't charge you. And that's because our sponsors pays the electric bills. They pay the lights on. They pay for the batteries that runs the show. And that's WarhammerFightwear.com. They have some of the best gear in all of mixed martial arts. I love wearing their tees. They have a ton of stuff for the ladies as well, especially the leggings. I know the ladies love those leggings. They're great. They're great to train in and great just to walk around the house. All right. WarhammerFightwear.com. Also, guys, another one let me shout out is Fusion CBD products. Fusion CBD products just gave us a code. So make sure you put in that code. It's FIGHT2020. So go to FusionCBD.com. Buy anything you want. They have already sales on the website. But if you want an extra 10% off, and this code they gave us is 10% off anything and everything. Fight 2020. That's 10% off everything at FusionCBDProducts.com. Mako Tech mouth guards. We love them in the Panhandle. Check them out. If you're in the Panhandle, from the Panhandle, definitely show them some love. Get connected with them. They handle the best mixed martial art mouth guards. And like I said, you don't need just to be a fighter or an amateur fighter. You can be someone who just wants to train or just someone wants to work out and protect their teeth. That's Mako Tech mouth guards. So make sure you stay with them. Last but definitely not least, Space Coast Botanicals. We love them so much. What a great company here in Melbourne Beach, Florida. We love our Space Coast Botanicals. They have the best balm in the world. It's that rub. It's like gooey rub. I literally bathe in it. Back rub, shoulders, elbows. It's the best. They have great oils, but I love their balm. Definitely awesome. Space Coast Botanicals. Check them out on Instagram. They're always very active. Great company, great guy. Make sure you stay with Space Coast Botanicals. All right, guys, that's it. I'm rolling out of here. What a great show. George St-Pierre, 5 potential opponents. Continued success. And stay bananas.